We have a really great tech scene here in Australia. We have some amazing technical talent. We actually had Melanie Perkins pitching Canva, had our famous pitch nights. We see companies like Hyperana who raised around about $16 million from Sequoia. One of the hardest things that we have here in Australia is the commercialization aspect of that. We're so far away from the rest of the world. There's so much capital that's existing out there for.
All right. Today's guest is someone I interviewed on my recent trip to Sydney, Australia, Martin Karafilis, the CEO of Fishburners, Australia's largest and longest standing startup community, which has empowered over 45,000 entrepreneurs with more than $600 million investment raised by their entrepreneurs, which is exactly why my firm Beyond the Billion is proud to partner with them in the Aussie ecosystem. As a serial entrepreneur and investor, Martin's latest venture was with Tilitter, a Sydney-based tech company that makes computer vision products that use the latest in artificial intelligence to automatically and accurately identify objects. Think a basket in a grocery store without having to scan them individually. He's also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Crazy or Genius, a bold guide packed with actionable strategies to unlock entrepreneurial potential, navigate the fine line between brilliance and madness, and master momentum. Join us as we dive into Martin's journey, from scaling global ventures to building thriving communities. We chat a little bit about the Australian ecosystem from an LP and GP perspective, so if you're interested in that, this is the episode for you. But of course, with one of Australia's most respected business leaders, this is full of gems, and I'm so excited for you to dive in. Let's get started. Martin Karafilis, CEO of Fishburners, serial entrepreneur, investor, and best-selling author. Congratulations, my friend. We just high-fived on that one. Tell us where we are today with Fishburners. I mean, the longest-standing and the largest startup community here in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Fishburners is Australia's largest and longest-standing startup community. So since inception in 2011, we've helped over 45,000 entrepreneurs with their products, their ideas. We've helped raise over $2 billion worth of capital. So we've had startups that have gone from the earliest stages right through to acquisition and IPO. We really pride ourselves on being the most inclusive and accessible startup space across Australia. And we're able to do that through our physical space. So from co-working, where we bring people together, right through our digital products, our events, pitch nights, and things like that.
So tell me, you said longest standing. When was Fishburners started, and why Fishburners? For the Americans that are tuning in.
Yeah, for those that haven't heard the word Fishburners before, the Fishburner ship was actually one of the first goods and trade ships that came to Australia. Mm-hmm. It was holding all of the innovation, all of the technology that was here to build what we have. So the name really comes from that transportation of the tech and goods, and really Fishburners sort of really prides ourselves on being that vessel for tech and innovation in Australia. We started in 2011, really. For those that don't know too much about the startup ecosystem in Australia, this was where we really got started. We had Blackbird that sort of raised their first fund. We started to see capital eventually starting to flow. We saw a lot of startups that were over in the US start to come back and start to deploy from an angel investment perspective and start to educate and help startups. We also started to see the landscape of technology change as well over that period of time. So we started to see, if you actually think about this, 20 years ago, software was still sold in a box. The cost of exporting from Australia a piece of software, you had to physically print CDs and send it to a shop overseas. We started to see that landscape change a lot. And really for startups to export their products from Australia and scale exponentially was a period of time that we saw so much growth in Australia.
I'm Sarah. Sarah, so lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you.
It's wild.
What are you working on?
Zonely, which is a social sport marketplace.
So is this the golf?
There you go.
Golf one.
All right, so is your handicap like zero? No.
Basically, we're filling inventory which is empty for golf courses. So they have a big problem. No different to like your Airbnbs. So social sport, I guess social golf hasn't that hasn't really been disrupted like airlines, hospitality, hotels has been. So building a booking engine for that, but also building a community where people can connect on demand, and then also building sort of inclusion into it as well. So making sure we can cater to underrepresented groups. So we know that only in Australia 20% of all golfers are women or girls.
Whatever I can hit, right, at this stage. Okay, I hit something. Almost. All right.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
Don't get that side of it. Yeah, that's not meant to. You're not meant to get that side.
We're all, of course, fresh off yesterday. Thanks for coming and supporting us at Beyond the Billion as one of our ecosystem champions with Rick Baker at Blackbird VC. I mean, tell us a little bit about your impression. And, you know, Rick, of course, was speaking a little bit about the venture landscape as well and that inflection point. So I guess let's start with reflections on yesterday as someone that's new to, I guess, the work that we do.
It was an absolutely amazing event. And I think the work that you guys are doing is absolutely awesome. So thank you so much for having Fishburners as a part of that. And I think really some of those key takeaways when you listen to Rick speak, Blackbird's been there right from the start here in the Australian ecosystem. And Fishburners is in that same boat. We really see ourselves as that glue to the startup ecosystem. There's really a bit of a disconnect between the stages of the founders that actually occur. So the support and resources that an early stage founder is going to need to those that are later stage is actually quite different. So seeing the capital be deployed at the earlier stages and ensuring that we have angel investors that are coming to the party and actually investing at the earlier stages and realistically at the most riskier stages is really important, and ensuring that we have that flow through to the VCs and ensuring that companies are held accountable and quite transparent around what they're doing internally. And I think Blackbird's one of those examples of a company that's doing really well about being transparent about their numbers, their KPIs, and what they're trying to hit.
So what was surprising to you about yesterday? You were part of the investor roundtable where we had family offices, we had angel investors, right? So across the spectrum, LPs and GPs, as well as the larger founder and funders panel. What was surprising to you?
It's probably not so surprising for myself, but I think for the room and what we could see is people understanding that investing in women founders is not charitable. The IRR for these funds and the return for their investments actually showcases the same and higher returns for a lot of these companies. So that for me is something that I really want to get out there into the startup ecosystem, but more importantly, it's something that needs to be advocated across angel investors from the earliest stage to ensure that they're investing through.
So when you think a little bit about the venture landscape in Australia, I mean, 2011, it's 2024, that is pretty nascent. How have you seen the evolution? Like, do we have enough of a capital base? Are there enough VCs? Are there enough entrepreneurs that are building? I mean, we were trying to count like the unicorns. And of course, for many of us, top of mind coming from Australia is Canva, Airwallex, which both have been invested into by our partner fund. So we know them well. What do you have to say to the Australian like startup community and where we are in terms of venture as part of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're sort of just seen funds raise their first, our largest fund raising $1 billion. We're starting to see that capital starting to flow from institutions and LPs being the super funds as well. We're starting to see that eye on those early stage investments and startup investments is something that can return capital to a range of different investors that were originally looking at a whole heap of different asset classes. In Australia, the startup ecosystem's pretty new. It's pretty fresh in comparison to the rest of the world. We have a strange sort of problem, but it's also something that's really advantageous for us as founders in Australia, is that we're quite conservative in the way that we run our businesses. We're quite conservative in the way that we prepare our products and the way that we go to market. I've lived overseas. I spent a lot of time across a whole heap of different countries raising capital from VCs. I also invest myself as an angel investor, and I see the pitch decks that come across. There's a set of resilience that actually occurs from the founders that we have here in Australia, where they're not going out there and just raising a whole heap of capital and blowing that money. They're actually having a really solid plan and strategy on how that they're actually going to go to market, and they're going to take their product and actually put that in front of millions and millions of people. We see also a lot of great deals that from international investors that are looking across the Australian market as well. what deals that you would see a startup that might have a huge valuation across in the US. You might see a startup that is at the same level doing something that's amazing and be able to get a really, really solid deal on that investment. Just purely based on the fact that they're located here in Australia and that iron competition phase is not as high as what it is in, say, the US.
So, of course, you mentioned super funds, and this is not common knowledge, but super funds are the pension funds. Many of them also today are investing in venture. But I heard it, I was discussing this at the Investor Roundtable. The foundations, the endowments in Sydney, in Australia, is not as active yet. Can you give us a sense there in terms of who is backing and holding up the funds ecosystem? What is the LP GP dynamic here? Any challenges you see? Because you are an LP as well in a couple of funds here.
Yeah, correct. I think it's interesting. We have a great sort of ecosystem of family offices across Australia that are doing a really good job for the later stage investments. And we're sort of seeing that middle ground where VCs, it's as hard of a time as what it is for a startup to raise capital for VCs to raise capital for their funds. So that's something to really think about in the startup ecosystem. And Rick actually touched on this yesterday, sort of talking about what are those ebbs and flows of raising capital, not just for the startup side, but also for the VC side, and understanding that we're sort of just come to the end of the original horizon of those original Blackbird funds. Blackbird Fund one was originally a 10-year fund, and it's sort of just starting to get those returns now. And we're starting to see this period of time where we'll see that starting to get put back into the startup ecosystem as well. So there's a range of angel investors that are now investing in early stage companies. We actually, a really good example of that, chatting with Luke Anir, founder of multi-billion-dollar company Safety Culture, investing in Leica products, being one of Australia's great startups. And at the earlier stages, being able to reinvest his money into the ecosystem and start to grow those companies. And look, I think some of the numbers of what those returns look like are exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, Canva was at the AFR, I think I was reading. Made millionaires out of quite a few of the early investors, including those who had a little bit saved up and backed Melanie. But Melanie herself, had said that back in the day in Canva, she had to fly all the way to Silicon Valley. Yes, she got rejected by 100 VCs, but she felt like she had to get capital from outside. Is this different now for your startups here in Fishburners? Do they still feel like they have to be abroad to get the right capital and support?
Yeah, that's changed a lot over the last sort of 5 or 10 years. And we see there's much more capital that's starting to flow here domestically in Australia. And we're starting to see the funds that are able to allocate funding to certain stages of companies. One of the great things about the way funds are set up here in Australia is their investment thesis around Australian companies and ensuring that 50% of their company is here in Australia, and making sure that we are putting money back into the ecosystem is really important. I think there's also an element to that people miss is the role of government. So government plays a really strong role here in Australia for tech and innovation for two factors, really, is about import-export policies and ensuring that we can play on a level playing field of some of the larger countries. But the other is we have a really good deep tech and innovation network across our universities, a bunch of different people that are working on some amazing technologies. One of the hardest things that we have here in Australia is the commercialization aspect of that. We're so far away from the rest of the world. There's so much capital that's existing out there for really front-facing consumer products. It's like, how are we going to invest in these deep tech products that are going to take years and years and years? And we see a lot of organizations that are backed by the government or supported by the government that are helping these institutions. So the commercialization of a lot of those technologies is something that should really excite Australians, and from a global standpoint as well. There's some amazing organizations like Cyro, Main Sequence Ventures, and other companies that are investing in these deep tech products.
Talking about challenges, when you look at the landscape today, you've been an entrepreneur yourself, and tell us a little bit about your startup. What do you think startups in Australia struggle with the most today, other than commercialization?
My last startup, I sort of grew that company globally. We sort of had main locations, US, Europe, in Germany, and here in Australia. Really, from the get-go, we had to go overseas. There was absolutely no way that we could start what we had here in Australia and actually grow that to that level. So that was a big thing for us.
So basically, the market's not big enough here to sustain it.
Yeah, and the market from a customer standpoint, but also from an investor standpoint as
Right.
well. We're talking 2015, 2016, where the markets here in Australia were really just starting to develop. And particularly as well, being a deep tech company is something that we were working in AI at a time when AI isn't what it is now.
Timing.
Yeah, absolutely. So commercializing that was a really interesting cycle for us. And it was something that we investors overseas really got and customers overseas really got, and it was hard here in Australia. But coming back and ensuring that we can also, from a mentorship perspective, and help other founders go through that process is something that here in Australia that is helping the ecosystem grow dramatically. We're seeing more capital starting to flow from a range of different angel investors that have started businesses overseas, that have come back to Australia, that are saying, hey, I really want to give back to Australia. We have a great lifestyle here in Australia.
Yeah.
We have great beaches. We have an amazing work-life balance. So entrepreneurs tend to come back here once things are looking pretty good.
I have to agree there. I was just telling my team that Sydney is one of my favorite cities with the water and, a good mix of lifestyle and all that. Work-life balance, I think, is something that Americans have to learn.
Yeah.
Hustle culture is very real. And, I've seen a lot of my friends completely burned out, right? Just from the pressure that, frankly, investors put in them as well. And once you start, it's hard to really stop and reframe your identity. A question that comes to mind is, you talk about how conservative Australians are from a culture perspective, how good the lifestyle is, and yet to be successful, you have to have global ambitions. How do you, align the two, and how are you developing that here in Fishburners?
Yeah, and I think this is a reflection as well when you look at any VC that's investing across the Australian landscape right now. There are very few investments that are made in companies that are not global, almost from day one. It's just a market size thing, and for us, it's ensuring that we have the right networks, the right people that are around those companies to actually start the business and make the right calls right from the beginning. But each phase is a little bit different. So making sure that we can provide the right resources, the right connections. So from an investor standpoint, ensuring that early stage investors are really meeting and connecting with early stage companies, later stage investors are with the later stage companies, and that they have the right information, the right tooling that will go through that process. 10 years ago here in Australia, if you were to say what's a data room, you'd probably have a bunch of people that have just a bit of a drive with a few different pieces of information, and you would go to the States and you would see a whole heap of different information that's being presented in a much better way from an investment standpoint. So ensuring that startups understand that. And we have a really great tech scene here in Australia. We have some amazing technical talent. It's quite competitive as we're starting to get more and more companies, but we have some amazing tech talent. And I think being able to ensure that they know how to commercialize their technology is really important, but being educated on what the investors are looking for and making that match is really important for us, because you can go through hundreds and hundreds of investors that say no to find the right investor. And I think that's really important for us to be able to grow the startup ecosystem here.
Yeah. So when you look at sort of where the Australians are building, it sounds like there's a lot in B2B these days, or B2B SaaS. What else are you excited by?
We have a really interesting makeup of startups here in Australia. So we have sort of your B2B SaaS companies just absolutely take the market here. But we heard this from Rick, and we heard it from a bunch of different VCs yesterday around AI companies and really being at front and center globally for some of the best AI startups in the world are coming from Australia. And that's really exciting for us.
Yeah. So in Fishburners, when you think about the community that you're building here, what are a couple of ideas that you've seen people working on that you're super excited about? Any case studies of success stories that came out from Fishburners that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we look at some of the case studies, there's two elements. There's what we've incubated and those that have come through other elements. So a good example is actually someone showed me a picture of the early days. We actually had Melanie Perkins pitching Canva, had our famous pitch nights. So Fishburners holds every week a Friday night pitch night. And we get a couple of hundred people that come to that. And we had Melanie Perkins there pitching at the earliest stages, and we start to see investment that flows from that. We see companies like Hyperana who raised around about $16 million from Sequoia. We have some amazing companies. One that I really like, founded by Nicole, who created a resource pack that was called the $100 MBA. This then sort of transformed into a podcast, and they now have over 2 million monthly listeners. For me, they're doing an amazing job of being able to utilize the current technologies that we have in the world to actually sort of bring that knowledge out there. We have some amazing entrepreneurs in Australia that are not tech based as well. I think that's a big thing. Is there's a lot of companies, when we look at like Janine Ellis starting Boost Juice, for example, as a company. She's someone that gives back to the ecosystem and actually very much so starts to now invest in companies and tech companies as well and give her expertise. So there's really good example of that flow of companies that don't necessarily have to be tech to be very successful.
So the theme of founders funding forward, as you've succeeded with your own journey as an entrepreneur. I asked you this earlier. Do you think you're more an entrepreneur? Do you have the itch? Are you an entrepreneur? I mean, now you're like a CEO of an ecosystem builder, essentially. But do you think you might create something new?
I really like the enjoyment of investing in a company and knowing that I can help from the sidelines when needed. I like the idea to be able to back companies that are ambitious and truly have a passion for a problem to fix. I think for me, that's what I'll continue to do. I'll continue to invest in startups and founders, have my impact that way. And I'll let the founders go through the painful times rather than myself.
So this sounds like you've had some pain, some scars in the past that you don't want to repeat, learning from mistakes. But I want to rehash that just a little bit, just for the purpose of some entrepreneurs that are tuning in here. We've got funders and founders that tune in. What was your hardest lesson when you think about your time as a founder that you wish you had learned earlier?
I think one of the biggest things was being involved in a community or a network was something that we should have done as founders much earlier along the journeys. We were a bunch of tech people that knew how to build a really cool product. And we kind of hear this even yesterday, hearing a few stories from founders that kind of took businesses to a certain level and they sort of said, that's it for me. How do I get to those next stages? So I think being involved from a community aspect and ensuring that you're finding the right mentors and finding the right networks is super important. And I think that's bigger than just a local system. I think that's globally as well. So I've been really lucky to eventually find the right people that enabled me to scale what we were doing, enabled me to grow as a person and learn from as well. That's really important. So the faster that you can start to do that is, absolutely important for your business. Wish that I probably did that a bit earlier.
Yeah. So for those that don't know your story with your startup, to what level did you build? And I guess you were quoting Christy Chong there, who sold Modi Body for 144 million.
Yeah.
And she actually shared with me that she felt she couldn't grow it anymore. And I mean, between two herniated discs, as we heard, a lot of stress. I mean, 250,000 in credit card debt and all of those in between. How would you compare that to your journey? Did you scale it to where you felt you wanted it to be?
For me, very similar. I went through a whole heap of lines of dodgy credit and whatever kind of money that we could get to start the business. I remember actually starting the organization and three of us founders looked at each other. We quit our jobs. And we came to the office on Monday and we said, do we actually have enough money to quit our jobs? And we said, no. So
great.
The first job was to find a way to get some money in the bank. So actually it was probably one of the best things that we'd ever done because there was a push for us to gain customers as early as possible and get it in the hands of customers as well as find investment. That was a really, really interesting time.
Remind me the business model that you eventually landed on.
It was a computer vision AI application specifically for retail. We were able to essentially create a scanner for non-barcoded items. You could put fruits, vegetables down on a supermarket checkout. It would automatically identify what they are. This could be used across a range of different store formats, from self-checkout to assisted checkouts to autonomous stores. No matter what that was, it was a fundamental element of the next phase of retail that we saw. We had a solid strategy that we sort of broke down into different phases. Our first phase was really to enable a way for our customers to actually adopt this technology. Innovation isn't real until it's in the hands of a customer. I think we, as society, probably face a lot of great ideas and not a lot of execution that occurs. That was something that definitely stuck with me along the way, is to say, okay, let's put it in the hands of customers. So we needed to ensure there was a way. We actually created hardware systems. This is something we did not want to do, but we had to do it to ensure that our technology was being adopted. But once the hardware systems were out there, we were able to then switch over to a software model where we can sell software globally for a monthly subscription service, allow retailers to use this technology. So really straightforward for us. And it was something that we set out from the start to say, this is our strategy.
And what was your exit for this one?
I was really lucky. We had quite a lot of investment into our business from a range of different sources. I think that's something for a lot of founders that, from a planning aspect, we're seeing much more occur here in Australia than what we ever occurred, was the secondary options and ability to actually have not only founders like myself be able to actually exit organizations, but also have a range of employees actually be able to sell their shares and gain some form of, monetary value, financial value for what their work that they put in. Canva's a great example of a company that, from a secondary option perspective, enables their employees, their early stage employees, to be rewarded for the work that they're doing, and it makes the startup ecosystem stronger.
So how much did you raise for your last startup in total?
Overall, we probably raised around about $15 million of capital from the earliest stages, and thereafter a lot of different work with a range of different financial institutions.
So did you sell it to a acquirer? What was the story there with your exit?
Yeah, so we had a large corporate organization that took a large stake in the business, as well as a VC that took a large stake as well.
Yeah.
And that sort of really propelled the business forward.
I guess what I'm getting to is, there's often a sentimental value for founders. And the question is, when do I stay? When do I go? Did you know it was the right time for you to go?
Yeah, I think for me, it was the right time. It had a lot to do with the fact that we had co-founders in the business, and we were able to say, okay, particularly for myself, I was able to move out of that role and allow other people to come in through that next phase. And we actually have two of the founders still working for the organization now. So we have a bunch of early employees that are still working for the business as well. So it's a good mix, and there's an ability to actually be able to say and really open conversations that occur behind closed doors. There's a lot of great conversations that happen between founders and between employees around, what are the goals and what does it look like? And that's always something that we've been able to plan for really well. I think it's something that all founders should be able to talk about very early. And a lot of the time, every investor wants to know what the personal goals are and what each individual founder wants to do over a period of time as well. What does that makeup look over time? May be the same, it may not be the same. But I'd certainly say if the business had one co-founder, it would be very difficult to leave the organization. I think, that's your identity, that's your input that's there, and you'd be super scared. But for myself, I was very, very much so trusting that everything could continue on in an amazing way and continue to grow.
What did that journey teach you about yourself?
When I exited that business, I spent a lot of time just playing golf.
Nice. And the beautiful golf courses of Australia. Yes.
I got a lot of time to sort of think about what was next. Did go down that path of thinking about, is it the founder life? Is it the investor life? How do I get involved in the next things? Is it from a lot of the board role offers that I was looking at? It was like, how can I really start to make an impact? And that was something that, for me, when I was talking to the Fishburners board, it was a role for me that I could truly give back to the startup ecosystem, tech and innovation ecosystem here in Australia, just ensuring that we can stand up on a global stage and we can continue to grow and scale as an industry. Rick touched on this, is there was no industry, 15 years ago. It did not exist. So to be a part of that and grow, that's really important.
So your best-selling book, of course, takes upon the reflections over your last few chapters. We want to encourage everybody to buy your book, but what is the key tenet there that you can share with us?
Yeah, so the book is called Crazy or Genius. Realistically, I think it's hard for every entrepreneur when they're building a business to actually understand is, are they crazy or are they a genius along that journey? And there's probably, to spoil it all, is you won't ever know until the end, to be fair. But there's a couple of key principles and a couple of key frameworks that you can use along the way to make sure that, hey, like, what you're doing is actually going to work. And I think you need to be driven. You need to be solving a problem that you're very passionate about, but there needs to be an understanding behind what are investors and VCs looking for, what's the market looking for, ensuring that you can sort of mix everything together in a way. But for me, there's just something undeniable about a certain founder mindset, a certain founder mentality. When they can mix that with a process, is something very special will happen. And I've seen a range of different founders go through some very tough times, and they've been able to pivot their businesses in a way that some would never ever expect. And I've also seen a lot of companies go from something that a lot of VCs, angel investors, people right from the start would say, why would I invest in this? Canva is probably a good example of something when Mel pitched a yearbook business and something that is going to rival Adobe. Do you think that it is going to be at the level that Canva is at right now? It takes something very special for an investor to go, yes, I back you and I back this business, because it could have gone a whole heap of ways, but there's something very special about a founder that can actually do that. So throughout the book, I pretty much talk about a range of frameworks that I used, a bunch of sort of grounding episodes, and a few of my personal stories about things that I learned.
So we've come to the end here, and I always end with a rapid fire. So quick questions, quick sentences, like one sentence answers, first thing that comes to mind. You ready?
Sure.
All right. OS ready. Martin, fame or fortune?
Fame.
Biggest career mistake?
Holding on to a business probably too long. I think one of my earlier businesses probably could have called it earlier.
What is a skill set that you feel is completely undervalued today?
Being able to reset, I think, is a really important skill. I know this is meant to be rapid fire, but actually a question that I used to always ask for any employee that I was hiring was, do you have a method for dealing with stress? Do you have a way to reset yourself when everything's going wrong? And there were two distinctive answers. One was a bunch of people that said, I just work harder. And the sustainability element of that is just not there. We all know this.
Yeah.
And those that had a method to be able to reset, whatever it was, that was something that we found that the best employees and the best founders have. So I think about this. A game of golf is ups and downs.
I feel like I need to play golf with this guy. I'm like, this guy must be really good. The amount of golf that he has played through the stressful times, I can see it. What's your handicap? Is it 0?
I'm the worst single figure handicapper that you would ever meet. So yeah, I'm a single figure handicapper, but I took up golf and was able to get there in about 2 years. So that in itself, I'm pretty happy about. But
that's awesome.
There's ups and downs, and I think you can be in the middle of a game and everything's going horrible. If you can find a way to reset and a way to actually ground yourself, you can actually start to come back and start to win that game. So.
Well, that segues very nicely into my next question. What kind of leaders do you hire?
Yeah, for me, it's all about the soft skills. A lot of the other skills can be taught, and there's a lot of things a lot of tools and resources that people can use. But when it comes to leaders, it's about the soft skills.
So what's one question that you ask in an interview that like tells you all?
I like the question to say, what would your boss say about you? Mm-hmm. But I also love the question to say, is your direct report, in one word, what would your direct report say about you? And it's interesting, some of the things that come back and some of the things that people would say. And we go ahead and we actually ask those questions and see if they match.
Well, I have to ask you that question. What would your direct report say about you? What would Dosh say about you?
So we have Dosh from our marketing team here. Dosh, do you have a word for me off screen? A word as a leader.
I think it's genuine.
Genuine. That's a good one.
There we go.
That's a good one. put you on the spot here. Josh, I love it. Thank you. I guess final one. What is something someone has said to you in your entire life, right? Childhood, whatever, that has stuck to you till today and has influenced you and continues to influence you?
There's two things actually that have really always stuck with me. And the first, I've always sort of played elite sports from a younger age. And there's a story in my book about what actually stopped me, an injury that really stops me from playing elite sports. There's this really famous statement that's said in a game of AFL football, for those that don't know, is an Australian rules football game, where the coach is saying, just go out there and do something. And I think that's the thing, is nothing is going to happen by just sitting back. So there's no ideas, there's nothing there. It's just always about the idea is like, actually go out there and just do something. That is going to have some form of impact. If you're sitting back and doing nothing, it's going to do nothing. So it's like, make sure you go out there and do something. The other one that has stuck with me for a little while now, there was a stage in my life where actually I had a head injury, and that was what stopped me playing elite sports. I had a fractured skull with a bleeding brain, and I was in intensive care for a while. The recovery was pretty hard and it was pretty long. And I remember getting told the Chinese proverb that most people know about, the idea that, hey, if something happens in your life, maybe it's good and maybe it's bad, and that for me, if anyone hasn't actually heard that, look it up. I actually do mention it in the book as well. And I think that whole proverb itself was something that stuck with me.
Wow. Love that. For making the moves and going out there and doing something, Martin, thank you for making your version of $1 billion moves. We gotta do a high five because we did it in under 30 minutes.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for tuning in this week. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow our socials on Sarah Chen Global to get the latest on the show. It would really help me out too if you enjoyed this to rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts and share your favorite episodes with a friend. I'm Sarah Chen-Spellings and you've been listening to $1 Billion Moves.